Prior to this deal, Kaylee, our country was careening towards bankruptcy. And after this deal, our country will still be careening towards bankruptcy. Look, in Florida, we run big budget surpluses. We have a $1.2 trillion economy, but our debt is only $17 billion. Well, obviously, in Washington, D.C., they do these cycles to just get them through the next election. And that's ultimately one of the reasons why they continue to fail.
Welcome back. That was Florida Governor and Republican presidential candidate Ron DeSantis criticizing the debt ceiling agreement while touting his own budget record back at home, although we should note Florida law requires the state to balance its budget. It comes after earlier this month, Donald Trump urged Republicans to let the nation default if Democrats did not agree to their demands. Joining me now on set is Leanne Caldwell, Washington Post live anchor and co-author of the Early 202 newsletter. Svante Myrick, former Democratic mayor of Ithaca, New York, and president of People for the American Way, and Stephen Hayes, editor and CEO of The Dispatch and an NBC News political analyst. Thanks to all of you for joining me this afternoon. So, Leanne, not a surprise what we heard from Ron DeSantis, that he would be opposed to anything that includes not lowering spending. But what do you make of what he said as it relates to what we're hearing from the Hill?
Well, not surprising. As you mentioned, he's a former member of the House Freedom Caucus. So the members of the far-right Freedom Caucus have come out, most of them against this bill. The question I have is, will that have any sort of impact on members outside of the Freedom Caucus? Kevin McCarthy is working really hard to keep his members in line. And while you noted that Donald Trump said that default is okay a while ago, Donald Trump also has not said anything since there has been an agreement. We know Kevin McCarthy has been in constant contact with him, I suspect to try to keep him silent on coming out from saying anything. But it does create some sort of a little bit of a contrast between DeSantis and Trump. We'll see how it translates on the Hill. I'm not sure if it's going to have too much impact.
Stephen, what do you make of what we're hearing from DeSantis, what we're not hearing from Trump? And do you think it will have an impact?
Yeah, look, I mean, analytically, Ron DeSantis is right. This is not going to alter the trajectory of our debt. What he didn't say is that even if you passed the Republican-only bill that passed in the House of Representatives, it wouldn't alter the trajectory of our debt because they're not dealing with entitlements, and entitlements are the drivers of our debt. So he's right, but there's an asterisk there. Look, I mean, it's not hard to understand why he's doing what he's doing. You make the play in a primary, Republican primary, where the base of the party is going to be sort of supportive of the most right-leaning position you can have. Yeah. That's what he's doing here. I don't think it's terribly complicated.
Svante, let's talk about what we're actually seeing on Capitol Hill. I mean, you have a lot of Democrats who feel like President Biden gave away too much in this deal, in part because he initially said he wasn't going to negotiate over raising the debt ceiling. He ultimately wound up negotiating. He says, look, it was over the budget, not the debt ceiling. But bottom line, taking place at the same time.
Yeah, that's true. And I think the timing is what President Biden and the White House are putting their hat on. They say, look, this is the deal we would have gotten later this fall anyway. We just got it earlier, and we a little bit pulled one over on the Republicans, which is typical President Biden, very low-key. You almost underestimate him. You think, does he know what he's doing? And it turns out he's a master congressional negotiator. I will just say the one thing on the DeSantis thing. It's become very, I noticed the date that DeSantis picked for when the budget got out of control. It wasn't when Barack Obama took office. It wasn't when Joe Biden took office. He made a point of saying March 2020, which President Trump was in office then. It's pretty clear that he is trying to stake out a position that Donald Trump is a tax and spend liberal and can't be trusted. It's a bold move.
It's pretty good argument. I mean, he added $7.8 trillion to the debt in 4 years. It's a pretty good argument. But you would expect if DeSantis is going to be true to his word, he should be rolling out his entitlement reform program at some point in the near future. I'm not holding my breath for it.
I do want to get to 2024 in just a minute, but staying on the debt ceiling for just a moment, Stephen, you basically, to the point that Svante was making, I mean, Kevin McCarthy got the president to negotiate. Should the Freedom Caucus, I mean, yes, they've been very clear they were never really going to support whatever deal was reached, but should they take the win here to some extent? I mean, are they, you know, politically speaking, could it potentially backfire?
I mean, look, I think a lot of their power derives from their willingness to always say, this isn't good enough, this isn't good enough. And again, in the context of the modern Republican Party, that works for a lot of base Republican voters. It helps them raise money, helps give them power. I think it helped give them leverage, frankly, in the speaker's race. So from their perspective, they would say, no, of course not. They'll be able to pass it. We're not on the hook for this. It'll work. But we can maintain our position.
Leanne, based on what you're hearing, do you think this ultimately will pass? I mean, how Americans sitting at home watching this all unfold, should they be worried?
I think it will ultimately pass. You know, the first test is right now in the Rules Committee that's happening, if it can get out of that committee. I'm going to get a little wonky here, but one thing that I'm watching is that rule that they pass out of Rules Committee today also has to pass the House floor tomorrow before they do final passage on the bill. And traditionally, Democrats oppose the Republican rule. And so McCarthy is going to have to find the votes to pass that rule. And it's probably not going to come from the members who are going to oppose this legislation. I've started asking Freedom Caucus members, are you going to support the rule to get onto the bill? And they're saying no. So McCarthy's going to have to make another ask of Democrats for Democratic votes.
So yet another hurdle for McCarthy coming up. All right, let's talk about 2024. Stephen, what are you expecting from DeSantis? Can he turn around his campaign? He obviously had a very rocky rollout. And if you look at the polls, he's really still trailing Trump.
Yeah, look, I'm looking for two things. One, can he right the ship, as it were? I mean, we saw he had pretty good fundraising numbers even after his botched rollout. The DeSantis people who are telling you that they don't really care about the botched rollout, doesn't really matter, that's not true. There's a reason that they put so much time and effort into a good announcement, and that's like the opposite of what you want. But look, he's had a rough couple months. He's had a bad rollout. People are underestimating him. I think their view is, yeah, we can overperform now, and even if we do okay, adequate's going to look pretty good. So I think that's what they're kind of banking on at this point.
Svante, what's your take? And look, you have Chris Christie circling the wagons, Sununu circling the wagons. In 2016, candidate Trump won the nomination because there were so many candidates in the race.
Yeah, I think there are still really, truly only two candidates in this race, and it's Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. And Trump is, as we said, DeSantis, he's taking a very interesting tact here by going to the right of Trump and hoping that there's space there. But I think already he's given the game away a little bit. By announcing on Twitter, it wasn't the technical difficulties that rubbed us all a little odd. What rubbed us all strange is why choose to do it there in the first place? Why not come on Meet the Press, on camera, a rally, something that you know will work? I think we all know what the answer is. He's trying to cozy up to Elon Musk, the richest person in the world. Now, if you launch your campaign by trying to cozy up to a billionaire, who himself, Musk, is trying to cozy up to Donald Trump, where does that leave the 300 million plus Americans who are wondering, who's a champion for us? So far, Ron DeSantis has not made the case to people outside of his bubble that he cares about them.
There's no doubt it is a risky strategy. We'll have to see if he has time to turn around. I want to talk to you guys about a potential third-party candidate. Our Mark Murray did this wonderful analysis. He crunched the numbers from 2016 and 2020. When Trump won in 2016, you had a high number of votes for a third-party candidates. In 2020, the tally was much lower. You see it there, 6% versus 2%. Leanne, how concerned do you think Democrats are, and I'm going to put this to Svante to get the reality check too, right now, as No Labels, a potential third party, it seems to be signaling they're very serious about putting a candidate forward?
Well, I love Mark Murray's numbers because it actually goes against what conventional wisdom has been. It had been Democrats who had been concerned about a third-party candidate, and so perhaps a third-party candidate will actually help Joe Biden. But, you know, I know No Labels has been working on this for quite some time, but there doesn't really seem yet to be a serious candidate and a serious contender who's going to step in. Of course, maybe Joe Manchin is a possibility, but they have a lot of steps to go before there's someone who can perhaps make a real difference in this race.
Svante, how do you see it? How do you see a potential third party?
Well, I hope you can show me where Mark Murray's desk is, because he ruined my coffee this morning when I read it. It's a great report, but it had me stressed out. Because he's right. Look, because Jill Stein was in that race in 2016, Donald Trump won. The numbers just show that out. Because there wasn't a serious third-party candidate in 2020, Joe Biden won. If No Labels runs somebody, they will be helping. They won't be starting a third party in this country. they will be helping Donald Trump win, period. So No Labels has to get really serious with themselves and ask, is that the point of that organization or not? I think we would be better off if we had multiple parties in this country. But the way to do that is to build a party from the ground up. To start a couple months before a presidential election and become a spoiler is, well, it ruined my coffee this morning.
Stephen, I'll give you the final word. How do you see a potential third party?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if we've learned anything over the past eight years, it's be cautious and humble, making straight line projections about what we think we know based on what we've seen. If you look at the NBC poll from the end of April, 95% of Americans said that they were not enthusiastic about a Joe Biden versus Donald Trump race. I think this is sort of speaking to them. And there are all sorts of ballot access questions, there's also fundraising questions, a lot of questions before this could become a reality. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's a reality that it's much closer to something like a Ross Perot bid, where people have just had it with what's going on in Washington.
All right, we'll have to see. Svante, we'll introduce you to Mark right after the show. Thank you all for being here. Great conversation, Leanne, Svante, and Stephen.